Gothic architecture, used to build churches, cathedrals and monuments throughout the country in medieval times. The ornate arched ceilings, stained glass windows and flying buttresses were a progression from the Norman buildings of years past and took cathedral building to new heights.
Some 500 years later, however, and the word has different connotations. So how did Gothic go from describing ecclesiastical architecture like this at Exeter Cathedral to evoking images of darkness, doom and gloom and misery like this? It's a story of transgression, subversion and misunderstanding, and it all started nearly 1500 years ago.
The first Goths to make a name for themselves were a group of Germanic people of the 2nd century and onwards. The Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, known simply as Goths, were a powerful East Germanic tribe who helped bring about the downfall of the Roman Empire.
By bringing about the fall of the Roman Empire, the Goths helped destroy what was thought of as classical culture, and in turn, they were thought of as primitive and barbaric, and that's what the word Goth started to imply. So how could the architecture that surrounds me here today be synonymous with the barbaric and the primitive? I mean, there's nothing really brutal about Gothic architecture, or is there?
To find out, let's use Exeter Cathedral as our Gothic model. Life started here in the 12th century, and much of the structure typifies the ideals of the Gothic architect. The stonemasons and the designers of the medieval period were obsessed with verticality. They wanted to build cathedrals that were filled with height and light, making you feel closer to heaven, and a few special features made this possible. So, for a lesson in Gothic architecture. First, the vaulted ceiling.
I'm walking below the longest uninterrupted ribbed vaulted ceiling in the country, and it really is quite spectacular when you look down there. But what do I mean by ribbed vaulted ceilings? Well, firstly, I have to take you back before this period of Gothic architecture, to the Norman period, where Norman buildings were built a lot lower because they didn't have this interlocking vaulted system in their ceilings. Their ceilings lacked architectural definition. They were more of a solid mass, a great deal of weight on the walls, which meant they couldn't achieve such wonderful height like this.
The flying buttress.
To support the great height of the cathedral, a new key feature was introduced, the flying buttress, and here you can see a series of them. They take the weight outwards and downwards. So in doing that, it frees up a lot more space inside the building to add stained glass windows, adding a lot more light. One of the distinguishing features of Gothic architecture, completely at contrast to those dark, dismal days of Norman design. And incidentally, another key feature in Gothic design was the pointed, arched window.
The Gothic arch.
Gothic architecture is renowned for its pointed windows. Previously, as you can see here on this example on the remaining Norman tower, the arches were softer and rounder, much more benign. Medieval architects liked the stronger aesthetic of the pointed window, which geometrically fed your eyesight upwards into the ribbed vaulted ceilings and then onwards into the heavens above, like you can see with the example there on that Gothic arch.
So, Gothic architecture hardly has the dark and gruesome undertones we've come to associate with the word. Well, maybe the odd bit has, but mostly it seems unrelated. So where is the link?
Now this is where it gets interesting. At the time of building this cathedral, the architecture wasn't described as Gothic, it was called Frankish work. And it wasn't until the Renaissance in the 15th century that the term Gothic was coined to describe it. So why choose such a word?
During the Renaissance, the classical culture of ancient Greece and Rome was again revered, and the work of the medieval times rejected as ignorant and even vandalous in comparison. So the term Gothic, which had come to mean rude and barbaric, was given to our medieval architecture, considered by the men of the Renaissance to be a blot on our landscape.
Despite the haters, the Gothic style was unstoppable. By the mid-1600s, it was reinvented for a more modern audience. And fast forward to the 18th century, and its meaning migrated to a new form of literature. Fantastical dark horror stories from authors such as Horace Walpole and later Mary Shelley.
And Gothic doesn't die there. In the next 200 years, it breathes life into film, back into architecture with its very own revival, and is expressed through music, art, and a rather particular way of dressing.
The word Gothic is as nuanced as it is descriptive, from the broad brushstrokes of a sinister atmosphere to the technicality that defies true Gothic architecture. It's a bridge between centuries and a whole range of artistic and cultural in-depth.
I've gone for a walk myself to reveal the exquisite detail in the cathedral that might have passed you by.
This is so typical of an oak pew end dating from the 13th century, but look at this. Look at the ornate cresting on this. And you have to remember, this has been carved from one solid piece of oak, making this entire pew end. Look how this angel, holding her arms like this, has been fashioned by a master craftsman, a wood carver, top of his genre, a technique that was taught by the monks, which was very, very fashionable during the 12th and 13th centuries. It's remarkable. And look at the patination and the wear. Thousands and thousands of hands over the centuries have rubbed this over the years, and this is just one of many simple things that sometimes goes amiss, but just take your time and you can spot them. That's a true work of art.